We are so glad that you're here. You are welcome to leave comments in the on the chat bar. If you don't comment, you're not here. That's the way it goes in online church, right? So please leave a comment, say hello. You're also welcome to ask questions. Today, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Michael Svigel, and I'm very excited to talk to him. He's written a fabulous book that I want to talk about, but he is also actually a theological scholar. And so, we talk to a lot of authors on this podcast and get a lot of interesting information. But I'm really interested to hear how his understanding of church history intersects with his understanding of current media and literature trends. So I'm going to talk to him in just a second. But if you're new to the School of Kingdom Writers, we are our mission is to impact the media with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And, we see a lot of opportunities in the world right now. We see a lot of opportunities for Christ to be represented in ways that he hasn't been before. And the church specifically hasn't done a very good job of approaching the media. And the COVID situation has forced us into a position where a lot of churches and things are kind of scrambling to figure out how this works. And so we're kind of bringing the church up to speed with the media. But I truly believe that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And I believe that the media is a unique place that we can intersect with the secular population, that we can create literature that kind of literature and all types of media that kind of expand outside of the bubble and reach people that aren't yet in a place where they know Jesus, but they want to learn more about this. They want to be curious. They want to have hard conversations. And Dr. Svigel, I think, is a person that is creating literature that does that to some degree. So I'm excited to talk to him. At the School of Kingdom Writers this year, we are training 200 writers through our online programs, which are our live programs, to craft literature that does exactly this. And so that's very exciting. And we're currently recruiting for our full-time program, which begins in September in Zanesville, Ohio. So help us spread the word. If you know authors that love Jesus and feel that they're called to write, we'd like to talk to them. But with no further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Svigel, and he told me I can call him Mike, so I definitely will as we get started here. And Mike, you'll need to unmute if you haven't yet. But so Dr. Michael Svigel is a professor of theological studies and a scholar of ancient church history. He has authored, edited, or contributed to over 50 books and articles, ranging from studies of ancient manuscripts to juvenile fantasy. So Mike, welcome. I'm really glad that you're here, and I feel like you have so much to offer. I've followed your Twitter feed for a while, and I've learned a great deal from you. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So tell us about Topia. I'm going to put it up on the screen here for you guys that are watching live. But, where did this idea come from?
Okay, I was afraid you'd ask that question. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I was on sabbatical about 7 years ago, my first sabbatical. I'm currently on my second. And as strange as this is going to sound, and this isn't me, but I actually had a dream about it. So I actually had a dream that I was writing a book and someone asked me what it's called and what it's about. And my answer in the dream was, well, it's called Topia. Don't ask me how I got that. And here's what it's about. And I had the basic principle here that kind of is the background of the book on the idea of virtual time travel and this, which becomes kind of a theme in the book, kind of the background. And I didn't have a whole lot of details about it, but when I woke up, I thought, that's not a totally bad idea. I'm sure people have had dreams and they think it sounds really good at 1 a.m, and then they reflect on it the next morning. They're like, no, that was really stupid. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I can develop this. And I actually then started working on it and got the first draft done during my first sabbatical, and then kind of let it sit and developed it over the several years. So that's kind of where the idea came from. But, as a writer, as a scholar, I'm drawing on all kinds of things, contributing to the storytelling.
Sure. Yeah. And I do that all the time. I find a note that I wrote in the middle of the night, like some genius idea, and it makes no sense whatsoever. I'm like,
exactly.
What are cauliflower frogs? I have no idea. And so, well, tell us the story of Topia. I mean, no spoilers, but because I think it's a great book. I read it. I saw you posting about it on Twitter or something. So I read it, and I enjoyed it. I think for somebody that enjoys books like The Hunger Games or something like that, it's near future science fiction. It's an easy read. It's one of those books that you can just kind of sit down and tear through, and it's a lot of fun. So what's the story about?
Yeah, so I don't want to give any spoilers, and especially the ones that have gotten a lot of readers mad at me. I've literally had readers mad at me because of chapter 63, but it's kind of a merger of two very common genres in science fiction, and that is the alternate history genre. You know, what if the Nazis had won World War II, or what if the South won the Civil War, or what if we never seceded or broke away from Great Britain? There's been stories like that, and I've always been intrigued by that. The what if history had gone this way, and the time travel theme in science fiction, and I kind of merged those together with this idea that, well, what if people in the future wanted to change the past, and it turned out to create a worse future than what they were trying to avoid. And so that's really the story takes place from our perspective about 100 years into the future, but it's based on a timeline that began in the 1920s. So, which in the storytelling process, it becomes interesting because I had to make sure I didn't use terms and technology and such that developed after the 1920s, you know, so you're coming up with new terms for things that would likely have developed in a different timeline. So that's kind of what it is. And then it's a story of a character, the main character, Jackson Day. He's actually written from the first person, from his perspective. And it tells his story of how he finds his place in this world, in this kind of ongoing conflict between these various parties. And it is a first book of a two-part is the plan right now series. So the story ends kind of with a cliffhanger.
Yeah, and I think that what you've done is really clever because you found a way to do time travel without a lot of the hangups and the logistical problems that time travel usually
The
carries.
Back to the Future problems, right?
Exactly.
Creating constant problems, and you know, and there is a sit-down moment when they're in a library and he's kind of explaining. One of the characters is explaining how time travel actually works, and you know, of course, it's a device. I make it up to kind of prevent those problems, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But you're right. It's time travel stories can be very, very difficult because every time you change something, you're altering the future or altering the past. It gets very difficult.
Well, and I think the alternate history component also helps with that, right? Because you have total flexibility then, you know, and anything that would interfere with it, you know, any technology or whatever, you can just do away with that.
Yeah, you can
And
do it with the technology. The thing is, what is all real is the places. So the settings, they're all real. They're places I've been, you know, in Europe, etc. But I had to imagine what would they be like if in 1920s history took a different route. So I could play around with how things developed. It was a fun exercise.
and so you know, it's been a few months since I've read it.
Mhm.
Is this an actual like was it are they Nazis in the book specifically that have
No,
proliferated?
yeah, the Nazi party and the what was the Communist Party ended up, and this will come out actually in a later book, but actually end up coming to some kind of consensus, which is unheard of. But if you think about the ideologies, the
Mhm.
basic DNA is sort of this atheistic, humanistic kind of, if you want to call it a religion or philosophy. And so with that in common, you know, that kind of morphed into what in the book is called the party and the guild, or the union. So it's this union between these two, what we think of as polar opposite philosophies, political philosophies, which form this uncomfortable union.
Yeah, and so in this universe, the Bible and other spiritual texts are banned.
They
Um,
don't exist. Yeah.
it don't exist, right? And
Yep.
so I'm curious, like, you know, that you've woven in so many faith elements throughout the book and, you know, references to theologians and things like that. How intentional were you about that? Was that something that you came back and you sprinkled it in later, or was it kind of integral to the idea from the start?
Yeah, it was. I'm going to say it was. It was fairly unintentional, but it was natural. So we said, you know, that these religious writings and all these things written up through the 1920s and a little bit beyond, of course, they don't exist anymore because they were eradicated. Well, they're still around. You can find them. They have to hide them, etc. So you can access some of these writings, the Bible, etc. but they're really not known because with the new regime, they erased and rewrote the history. So that is a background theme already. And then one of the organizations that kind of comes into play, the Scion organization, does have a basic theistic worldview that is unheard of to our main character. So with that, of course, comes some, I'm just going to say generic theistic religious elements. There's nothing explicitly Christian
Mhm.
because really you're dealing with a society that is atheistic or non-theistic or anti-theistic. And so really the next step in exposing someone to something other than that is really basically a theism. So that has given me a lot of freedom. I don't have to get into doctrinal issues or,
Sure.
all the details of dogma. It's just really theism versus atheism. And so it's, yeah, it's incidental. Um, but it does kind of form the background of this particular, the tenet, the main foundation of this particular organization.
Yeah, and so what kind of conversations do you hope that a book like this stimulates? As you're looking at the landscape of what we might call Christian literature right now, and I don't think
Yeah.
this really is Christian literature per se, but where do you fit into that conversation that's happening?
Yeah, I don't consider myself to be an author of Christian fiction. I find sometimes, and I don't want to criticize that too much. I have friends and such that write
Sure.
those kinds of things, and they have a place. But it's written to Christians, for Christians to kind of validate or illustrate their faith. That's not really what this is, and it's not really something I'm really interested in doing. It's more engaging people more at the philosophical level. This is. Uh, I think anybody could pick this up, an atheist, a theist, an agnostic, or somebody enjoy the story, not feel like they're being preached to, but also hopefully prod them. The in the story, for instance, the main character is given some of these banned books that were written prior to the 1920s, and they're real books. So you could look up these books and Google them and find them. Probably they're in the public domain because they're old intentionally, and read these things on theism and a defense for the existence of God. This is one of his big hangups is there such thing as a God? And that's a big hangup for us. And as you know, in the story, other things are motivating his belief or lack of belief in God.
Mhm.
And we acknowledge that it's not just follow the arguments, you believe in God. There's more to it than that. And it becomes very
Yeah.
personal for him.
Yeah, and it will. And so as you're doing that, I think there are two other pieces that come into play. There's this conspiracy element to the book, right? Where
Mhm.
at the end of the book, we're really not completely sure who the good guys and the bad
Who do you
guys are yet.
trust?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that's
Is
that's a
he
big piece
even
of the
one of the good
cliffhanger.
guys?
Exactly. Yeah. And so do you how do you handle that, when essentially the guys he's been loyal to so far are the ones putting forth this theistic worldview, and
Yeah.
then throwing them back into suspicion? Does that make you uneasy at all?
Yeah, but I think that that's realistic. I think it's
Mhm.
true to life. With faith, there's always this element of doubt. I like to tell my theology students, look, I know for a fact, I'm 100% sure that I'm not right in all my details of my theology, and I'm 100% sure I'll never know which areas those are.
Mhm.
And that's just life. We're all constantly living in uncertainty and uneasiness, and I think um, that angst that comes from that. I think maybe it's a little bit exaggerated for the sake of the story, but I think that all of us experience that to some degree. And I think the atheist and the theist and the agnostic should all be equally angsty about their worldview and how they make sense of the world through that. So that's kind of what you're following along with the main character. You're kind of experiencing that with him, beside him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really appreciate that about this story. And so, kind of on a similar line, how do you make decisions about, say, violence to include, and
Yeah.
some of these kind of content choices, and not necessarily from an advice standpoint, but personally, what's your process for deciding what stays and what goes in a story?
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion out there among authors on traditional publishing versus independent publishing or self-publishing, or
Yeah.
I do go through the KDP and the Amazon, but um, for my fiction, and one of the reasons motivators for that sometimes is because Christian publishers especially do have very strict standards, what you can put
Right.
in a story, what you can't. And by self-publishing, you do avoid some of those strictures, but you have to be careful because I do have an audience. I write popular and scholarly theology, and I'm a conservative, Protestant Christian, and so of course I have my own moral guidelines, what I'm able to be comfortable with. But here's the problem. I think stories, typical Christian fiction that really sanitizes things, sex, cussing, violence, it is presenting a picture of the world that doesn't really exist.
Right.
It's like walking down that main street to Disney World. It's like, this is really great, but no city in the world is like this.
Yeah.
I like being here, but you can't live there. So my philosophy is, look, if it's integral to the story, if it's part of the character, then I would say it's truth. That is a virtue. We value truth, and truth to life storytelling is virtuous. The Bible is very honest, about
Mhm.
the roughness of life. So I think that that's a big gap for Christian authors, is not presenting a real anthropology, a real doctrine of man, doctrine of humanity, or a real
Yeah.
doctrine of sin. And it tends to look a little bit whitewashed. So that's my perspective. There are a few mild curse words in the book, because of the universe. Many of them are in German, so that helps me a little bit, gives me a little out. But
Yeah.
there's a few moments of violence, etc. But I try to keep it PG-13 as a goal.
Yeah, I think that you did a good job of that. And as a patristic scholar, right, a scholar of the early church, how does that shape kind of your perspective on content in media, or even how we use media? I mean, is there
Sure.
anything analogous from the early church to kind of what we have now and the kind of the opportunities we see?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I would say this. I want to kind of maybe offer a little advice, especially to beginner storytellers. We people who want to tell stories or write fiction, in their mind they think, what I need to do to become a great storyteller is to read a whole lot of fiction. Just read everything and read fiction and absorb fiction. And the problem with that approach is, pretty much it guarantees that whatever you're doing is going to be derived. You're going
Mhm.
to be, absorbing other people's writings and then kind of weaving together from that raw material. But my study of history, of philosophy, of theology, science, very broad reading, languages, travel. Those are the things that good storytellers draw from to kind of craft their own story from raw materials. So I would say, it's not obvious, but obvious. Well, I am grabbing, books and different ideas and philosophies. If people are looking for them, they'll see them woven into the story and the fabric of it. Um, I would say try to expose yourself as much as you can to those raw materials. Philosophy, history, theology, those things will go a long way for doing really good original storytelling.
And I think we see that. I mean, with so many of the greats, right? I mean, Kurt Vonnegut was an anthropologist.
Yeah,
John Grisham was a lawyer. I mean, there would be no John Grisham if he'd studied English in college,
exactly.
right,
Right.
and done that. And so, well, I want to talk a little bit about your publishing as well, because your path is a little unique. And so,
Mhm,
to the students in our classes and things, I talk about being multimodal, which
mhm.
I think you are, where you kind of have eggs in a lot of different baskets, right? And unique to you, I think, is that you have self-published Topia as a YA fiction book, but you mentioned that most of your work is traditionally published, right? Your
Yeah.
scholarly work and things like that. How do those two worlds fit together? Is there tension there? How do they work together?
Yeah, I mean, there can be. So I have, my very first thing I ever published was this book called Heir of the Forgotten Realm. I've actually rewritten it and revised and re-released it. But Heir of the Forgotten Realm was published by traditionally, but by a small kind of startup publisher that ultimately went out of business, and I got the rights back. And then since then, I started doing more popular theology, scholarly writing, and for about 13 years, I've had an agent. So I've been dealing with traditional publishing through an agent. It's been with all Christian publishers. So I have that process kind of going on the side. And then when I started picking up fiction again, I bounced it off of him, and it's, as you know, Topia is kind of it's not a traditional Christian fiction work. It's
Right.
not quite secular. It's sort of in between. And he kind of bounced it back to me and said, "Here, you can do what you want with it. You're on your own." So I decided to self-publish. I decided to try that out and see how it goes. I have had several things published already traditionally, and so I would say those things kind of work well together, because they, if I can use this language, they kind of cross market each
Hmm.
other. So people will read something I've written in theology, and see that I've done fiction. That's kind of interesting, and pick up the fiction, or the fiction will lead to people reading the theology. So they do kind of
Yeah.
cross market, and you can kind of leap from one platform into the other. I like to say that there's a fine line between my theology and my fiction. My fiction is uh, kind of teaches some theology through storytelling, and my theology teaches theology through um, uh, a narrative. Kind of, I'm weaving those things together to some degree in everything I'm writing.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And do you run into any like legal boundaries with that? For instance, I mean, did your agent have a right to Topia? Did you need to get a release or anything like that?
Yeah, he has our arrangement is he has first right of refusal. If there's a project I'm doing, he doesn't want to do it, I'll offer it to him, and so I've run by him and said, look, I think I'm just going to I want to move forward on this, and I just want to self-publish it. And he gives me permission to do that, but I would have to, give him the first right of refusal on it based on our contractual agreement.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit. Um,
Sure.
you, we're obviously in a really interesting time in the history of our country right now, right? And a lot of
Yes.
things going on. And so I've been following you on Twitter for a while. That's how we connected initially. And you do a great job of you have a running theme in all your tweets, right? You do this
Yeah.
theology
Theology
101 thing, and
101
it's
mostly. Yeah.
it's very consistent. I always know exactly what I'm going to get from you. But I have noticed over the past few months there are times when you kind of creep out of your lane a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so as if you could talk to our authors who are starting social media, and typically we advise them, pick a lane and stay there, right? Not
Yeah.
not like a judgmental way, but just let people know what they're going to get from you and stick
Sure.
to it. What's your decision making process in that regard, like as you decide what belongs and what doesn't?
Yeah, it's hard, and sometimes I probably make bad judgments, but I try not to. So that kind of evolved. It developed over the years, and with some advice from some of at the seminary where I teach, Dallas Theological Seminary. I've had advice given to me by some of the people there who are in charge of PR, et cetera. And they kind of pick a gig. You got to have a gimmick. You have to
Mhm.
have the
Yeah.
thing that you are. And so I kind of eventually settled on this. Yeah, the theology 101 kind of tweets are going to be my thing. When I do, as you've noticed, when I do break out of that and don't have a theology 101, it's usually uh, for the purpose of drawing attention to it. So if you're the guy who's in a meeting and you're quiet, when you finally do speak up, people will listen to you. And it's the
Right.
same principle. So I usually reserve it for things that are a little bit more hot topic, current event type things that I really want to make a point. Um, Usually things that are quickly dated, so they're probably not going to pop up again. Whereas
Right.
I do kind of recycle some of my theology 101s every few months. So yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I'm it may not come across this way. I'm not political. I kind of consider myself moderate. So even when I am commenting on political things, I am still coming at it from a platform of being interested in theology for the purpose of cultural engagement and such. So I am not a member of any party or partisan in any way, but sometimes being in the middle, you'd think it would make everybody happy with you. In fact, what it does is it just makes everybody upset with you. So,
Right.
but that's
Well,
okay.
I think you're prompting really good questions there, and important questions. So as you approach kind of the narrative of our politics and things right now through the lens that you have, that scholarly lens, what are your thoughts on like big tech censorship and things like that, if I can ask?
Yeah. And again, whatever I say is going to get somebody mad at me, but I'm used to it.
Sure. We're here to talk about media, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's important. So I would say, and I've even tweeted this. Look, legally, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The private tech companies can do whatever they want. If they want to ban me because they don't like something about me, I will not feel like my First Amendment rights are being infringed upon. If the
Sure.
government does this, that's a different story, right? That's really what the Constitution is telling us. But I will say it's probably not wise, and it makes me very uncomfortable. On the other hand, so I'm kind of like, yeah, they can do it, but I don't think they should, except for obvious, uh, dangerous, violent, inciting violence. Those things obviously have to be controlled to some degree. I can't do that in normal speech, right? I can't go out and incite violence.
Sure.
So I would say it's probably, I'm very uneasy with the trend to kind of censor, to shut down. I'm not really a big fan of what they call the um, cancel culture. This
Sure.
is, I just feel like, but I've never been a big fan of boycotting things either. So
Okay.
I'm kind of like, look, let people live, and do to others what you would want others to do to you. And I feel like, we, there are limits, obviously, but I don't think censorship is the right process normally,
Sure.
right?
No,
And
that makes
Topia actually shows you kind of the extreme end to that, right?
right. Yeah,
We don't want
absolutely it
that.
does. Right, right. And I think sometimes modern Christians in America, we can fall victim to a false sense of persecution.
Yeah,
Right? I mean, persecution is such an important part of the Christian faith, and when we don't have any, sometimes we find it where it doesn't exist.
yeah.
But with what we're seeing now, do you feel that Christians are persecuted in the media, or that is a relevant danger at this point?
No, I wouldn't call it persecution. I would say we're marginalized. We're maybe mischaracterized. And I'm not trying to cause any trouble here per se, but I will say, look, we've noticed over the last 10 years, any TV series, any movie, you have almost, it's expected that you're going to have um, a gay, lesbian, homosexual, some kind of character
Right.
representing that kind of subculture. Very rarely do you see an honestly portrayed evangelical Christian or Christian per se at all. They're stereotyped, or they're in the background conducting a wedding. When that's as big a part, in fact, larger by the percentages of American culture than you know people of various alternative lifestyles. So I would say it's a bit unfair. They've been marginalized to a large degree, but I wouldn't call that persecution. They are. In Topia, I'm writing from a theistic worldview, pushing a certain philosophy. Right, I'm
Mhm.
representing that, and the people in the writers' room are doing the same. So if when Christians are able, and I do know people who are in show business and writing in Hollywood who are Christians, they have that opportunity to maybe set the record straight and get their voices heard. Um, but it's not persecution.
Sure. No, that makes sense. No, and I appreciate you going there with me. I know it can be a
Yeah.
difficult topic to even talk about when you don't have the full time to go into the nuances and
Right.
context of
Yeah.
everything you're trying to say, right? So I do appreciate it. So yeah, and obviously Topia is a good example of the farthest end of the spectrum on that thing. So when can we expect Topia 2, I guess?
I have it all outlined. I've kind of actually started and worked on it, but my process, with everything else going on, it's probably going to be a few years before I get it finally hammered out. But it's in the works.
Awesome. Cool. And so Mike, where can people connect with you if they like what they're hearing? What's the best way for them to, find Topia and just kind of be more
Sure.
familiar with the
Yeah.
work?
So my name's Svigel, Svigel. It's very, very rare. If you ever meet somebody with that, I'm related to them. So, but that also makes it easy. You just go to Amazon, type in my last name, and pretty much everything I've written will pop up. And because Topia and the two fantasy works are all through Amazon, that's the best way to get a hold of those things. They can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Svigel. That's another benefit of having a very rare last name. I'm the only Svigel on there. So Svigel, you can follow me on Twitter, and those are my main areas where I'm active.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Michael Spiegel. I really appreciate your time and your insight on some of this stuff. So, and thank you for writing Topia. So,
Yeah.
we wish you the best, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So we'll see you later. All right. Well, we want to thank Mike for joining us today. I really do appreciate his insight, and this is interesting. You know, we've done several of these interviews so far, and this is the first one that isn't with somebody that I know really well. You know, a client of mine or someone that I've worked with. Specific personally. So I really appreciate his time coming on and sharing some of his thoughts and insights as a person who's done a lot of writing and done a lot of publishing. So if you would like to learn more about the School of Kingdom Writers, you can join us at sokw.org/subscribe. If you join our mailing list there, you'll find options to follow us on all the different platforms that we are in. And through our mailing list, we'll send out writers tips and other resources, and mostly just ask you to pray for the media in our country, to pray for this mission that we've taken on. I want you to do one thing for us right now. If you've made it this far, if you've listened this long, whether you're live with us or you're listening to the podcast, this content that we've shared, you know, the insight from Dr. Svigel, think of somebody right now that would benefit from this content, and hit that share button for me. Hit that share button and send it their way so that they can check it out, so that they can benefit from the fruits of our labor here. And while you're at it, go ahead and click like. And if you haven't checked in yet, if you haven't left a comment, go ahead and just say hello or some other note for us. We appreciate hearing from you, and we'll look forward to another interview next week. So I'm expecting a different kind of interview next week. So stay tuned, and we will see you soon. So be blessed, and thank you for hanging out with us for half an hour here.